on, everybody? Welcome to this new edition of Inside the Huddle right here on High School Cube News. Once again, Brian Chimino with you with Mike Clark of the Sun-Times and Beth Long of Fox Sports and Scout.com. And Week 3 is in the books already. We're going to talk about some of the results that we saw throughout the Chicagoland area. Mike, first off, a big one. Glenbard West knocking off Downers Grove North. Sort of an upset. Glenbard West switches from 18 to 6 on your rankings. And Downers Grove North, they're just the opposite. They go to drop down to 18.
Yeah, well, the people in Glen Ellen will tell you that that wasn't an upset, that Glenbard West was probably the favorite in that game. And, I mean, their defense is what we expected it to be, what it's been the last few years. That's been their calling card. That establishes them probably as the favorite in the West Suburban Silver again. Downers North is going to be heard from, though, for sure. I mean, David Edwards is still a great up-and-coming quarterback, and, it's just a tough matchup for a lot of teams against Glenbard West defense.
And another result from Week 3, Wheaton-Warrenville South's meteoric rise up in the rankings, all the way up to number 5 after a huge win over Wheaton North.
Yeah, Wheaton South is back. I mean, we kind of knew that from beating Glenbard West in the opener, beating Maine South in Game 2, and then this one also, it was not as close as the final score. It was 17-0 going into the fourth quarter. Wheaton North scored about midway through the fourth quarter, and then they scored again on the last play of the game. Wheaton South's defense, that's probably an underrated unit, and they got enough done offensively. Good special teams again, too. One of the things that probably is overlooked a little bit, but never at Wheaton South, Evan Jakubowski, their kicker and their punter, he put one punt inside the 1-yard line. He had another 50-yard punt. He kicked a field goal. Most of his kickoffs were into the end zone, so that was a tough thing for Wheaton North to overcome.
Beth, the number 13 seed in the rankings, CreteMonee got a little bit of a scare against the Simeon team that's 0-3, maybe a little better than 0-3, but still 0-3.
Those two teams traditionally have some of the best prospects. In the last couple of years, Crete especially, their defense is just impressive in the way of Division I prospects. But the loss of Laquan Treadwell kind of left a big question mark for the Warriors to figure out, is the offense going to be near as good as it was last year? I guess the game against Simeon kind of proved that, maybe they do have a ways to go on offense. Their defense, though, I think, is also the strength of that team, which is kind of funny. Every team we've talked about that came out with a win this weekend, it's been because of the defense.
And we talked about quarterback for Willowbrook last week. Brian Johnson threw for almost 700 yards. Well, this week he wasn't that good, only 350 yards or so. So he's averaging over 1,000 for the last 2 games. Mike, he's got to be in the Player of the Year conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy who certainly wasn't on a lot of people's radar. We talked about that last week a little bit, about how he's not getting a lot of college interest. Maybe this is going to change a little bit. I mean, he did have another big game last week. As you said, he's over 1,000 with 9 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. Usually you think of the big-time 4-star prospects as being the Player of the Year candidates, but sometimes a kid just comes up and puts up some huge numbers that can't be ignored, and Brian Johnson's certainly in that category.
Let's take a look at some of the Week 4 games coming up this Friday and Saturday afternoon. Catholic Blue getting underway, Mike, some big games. Number 1, Mount Carmel. They'll actually be hosting Brother Rice, who's 1-2, but a little better than that on Friday.
Mount Carmel is just rolling along. Hasn't really been tested very much. They beat Bishop Mack 42-0 last week. Bishop Mack has some talent. Probably going to be a factor in the Catholic League White Race, but was kind of banged up for that game. This is going to be a tough matchup for Brother Rice, especially coming off a loss to Fenwick. But, Catholic League Blue is always entertaining, and then that Saturday game, is going to be interesting to see. Loyola, their calling card again has been defense, like we've been talking about this whole show. They've got a pretty tough assignment, that Beth can talk about, trying to defend Miles Boykin.
Yeah, he's a kid that not just rising up the charts, maybe in the way of, hey, we need to game plan against him, but he's rising up the recruiting charts too. Just picked up an offer from Ole Miss, already had an offer from Illinois. I mean, when you see SEC Big Ten teams start recognizing talent, you know that he's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Another big matchup this weekend. Number 17 team, Bennett, seems to like they still have to prove themselves a little bit, Mike. Also, they'll be facing CreteMonee, number 13 team.
Yeah, the tough thing for Bennett, of course, is they lost Porter Onco, who was their 2-way player. Jack Beneventi, their quarterback, is a great player also, but taking that talent of Onco out of the mix, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But again, Crete showed maybe they were a little bit vulnerable this last week against Simeon. How that's going to play this week, are they going to come out more fired up? Who knows?
And before we got here, like we always do, like to end this show, Beth, recruiting update. You got to see Cameron Green, wide receiver for Stephenson this past weekend.
I did. Stephenson finally got that win. They looked great doing it. Cameron Green picked up the very next day. They played Thursday night. Friday morning, Illinois came into school and offered him his first Big Ten offer. He had just picked up an offer from Toledo. So he's another guy. It looks like the wide receivers in the junior class may be the strength of the Chicagoland area when it comes to recruiting, which is interesting. Another year of skill guys.
That'll do it for this edition of Inside the Huddle here on High School Cube News. Keep checking the site for more on the rankings and recruiting throughout the Chicagoland area. Brian Chimino, Mike Clark, Beth Long, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.